Hey everyone, Firegrass here, and today I'm going to be talking about Melding of the Flesh, a new item coming out in patch 3.17. So for those of you who haven't seen yet, GGG just put up a new item, the first one of patch 3.17, Siege of the Atlas, and it simply reads minus 76 to all elemental resistances, and then elemental resistances are limited by your highest maximum elemental resistance instead. So this duel may seem confusing, but it's actually quite simple. It just means that if you stack maximum elemental resistance of one type, it counts for all the other types. So if you were to get +4 max fire res, you would then also have +4 max cold res, +4 max lightning res, etc. As you can see here, if you were to earn a 90% max fire res, it would then give you 90% max cold res or max lightning res. Doesn't matter which type, you know, you can stack 90% max cold res and then you would get 90% max fire res, etc. It's very, very simple. It doesn't give you the max res, however. You still need to earn the resistances on your gear to hit the cap, right? This is just raising the cap for all the different types of resistances, and it actually makes it a lot harder to reach this cap because you're getting minus 76 of each type of res, as you can see here. You would possibly want to use an item that gives minus 76 all res. I think RF players that are wearing a Mage Blood. I think it's as simple as that. I see a lot of people, you know, speculating that maybe it's going to be like a Doriani's prototype item. People are going to use it, you know, just with base RF without the Mage Blood, or that Mage Blood people are going to use it even if they're not RF players. I don't really think so. I don't think it's nearly as complicated as people are making it out to be. I think quite simply that the downside is quite huge, and Mage Blood does offset this a little bit. But the thing is, you know, opportunity cost always has to be considered, right? So just because Mage Blood can help you overcome the resistance penalty quite easily, the thing is that resistance penalty could be used for other things. So if you're wearing a Mage Blood and you don't have to focus on resistances, it means you have more room for attributes for spell suppression or things like that, you know, other suffixes that are highly useful to your character, right? It means that you can make your character more powerful. And then having to spend the Mage Blood resistances overcoming the penalty on just this duel means you need to go back to having resistance on your gear, which means you can't stack spell suppression or all that other sort of stuff. So I just simply think this is going to be the Righteous Fire players who are already stacking additional max res and also have access to a Mage Blood to help compensate for that penalty. They're going to get really, really big value out of this item, and the penalty isn't going to feel as bad, especially given that, you know, an RF player doesn't need their suffixes as much as a lot of other builds. So I've also made a table here that sort of shows you the total reduction. Now, if you were to hit 90% max fire res on RF, and also had Mage Blood with the flask setup that reduces elemental damage, you end up with 75.6% elemental damage reduction from the point of having 75% elemental resistance. This is like having a whole extra layer of 75% all res on top of your 75% all res. If an enemy at 0 res were to deal 16,000 damage, when you add resistances, Mage Blood, and the Jewel, basically you're then going from 16,000 damage to 1,000 damage. This is quite a crazy amount of elemental damage reduction. You know, it's going to be one of the strongest forms of damage reduction in the game, but it's very niche, and it's not going to be accessible to most players, right? It's, you know, it's possible to stack, you know, 14k life on any build, but doesn't mean you're going to do that, right? So the power level it offers is insane, but all the conditions to meet that power level kind of lower the practicality of this item a significant amount. I don't think it's going to see very much use at all, and, you know, the amount of Righteous Fire players that are wearing a Mage Blood in the world, you can count on, I think, like 1 or 2 hands, right? So Captain Lance is going to love this item. I'm going to review all these items with a rating system in future. I think just out of 5. It's a very straightforward rating system, and it sort of easily communicates how I feel about things. I'm giving this a 2 out of 5. It's not a useless unique. It's not one of these uniques you look at and you think like, oh, well, if I, you know, run the worst skill in the world and I unequip all, you know, all of the good gear and don't wear any good uniques, and, you know, you're not giving up too much to access this. This is more just the conditions to access it are really high. You know, for the Righteous Fire players that are wearing a Mage Blood, this is going to be great, right? But for everyone else, it's kind of air, right? But this isn't a situation where you have to utilize a bad build in order to make use of this item. So it's not a 1 out of 5 like a lot of other items in the game are. Like, there's not going to be a scenario where in order to utilize its power, you have to become weaker significantly. This is just a case of not many people are going to be able to access it. So, yeah, 2 out of 5. It's not the worst item in the world, and that's for sure. It's not even in that worst category, but it is very inaccessible to casual players. I really think you're not going to use this item if you don't have access to a Mage Blood. Look, there are going to be a couple builds that do have enough access to elemental resistance to overcome the penalty, but there's not many, right? So, for the most part, if you are a casual player and you don't have access to a Mage Blood, you're probably never going to consider fitting this item into your build. And it's also unusable by 99% of the builds, right? So even if you had a Mage Blood, I don't think you're going to use it. You know, like, you don't typically find ways to fit extra max res into your build as a Mage Blood player, and even if you did, you know, again, I talked about there's still the fact that suffixes are worth something, and giving up the extra resistances you're getting from Mage Blood Flasks then means you have to give up your suffixes for elemental resist to hit the cap as normal. So yeah, it's just, this is a super niche item. It's inaccessible to most casual players, but it's not the worst. It's going to be strong for the small group of people who use it, so I think it earns a 2 out of 5. It has no chance of being any higher, and it certainly doesn't have any chance of being lower. One final thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up the video is Tempered by War. I see a lot of people on the Reddit thread saying this item is going to be insane with Tempered by War, and I have some bad news for all you guys. Tempered by War does nothing for this item. So this item is going to raise all your maximum resistances, and I'm just going to give you a very simple example of why Tempered by War is useless. So let's say Shaper slams you for 10,000 cold damage. I mean, I know that's an unrealistic amount. I don't even think the slam does cold damage, but alright, let's say Shaper hits you for 10,000 cold damage, right? So let's say you also had 90% max fire res, and with the jewel that was giving you 90% cold res, 90% lightning res. Okay, so with Tempered by War, 50% of that cold damage would get converted to fire. So from 10k cold damage, we now have 5k fire damage and 5k cold damage, and because you have 90% max resist for each type, you're going to then reduce both of those lots of 5k damage down to 500 damage. So you're going to take 500 cold damage, 500 fire damage, you're going to take a total of 1000 damage overall. Okay, now let's say you remove Tempered by War. You would take 10,000 cold damage, and then that would get mitigated by 90% down to 1,000 cold damage. In both examples, you've taken 1,000 damage. Tempered by War did absolutely nothing, but it did cost you a few points on the tree to take the extra jewel socket. It did cut you out from the ability to use other timeless jewels, and it did make it a lot harder to cap your cold and lightning res. As you see here, 50% less cold, 50% less lightning res. So Tempered by War is like all downsides with this jewel. If you're running this jewel, there's no scenario ever where you're going to be using Tempered by War. It does absolutely nothing, it just makes it harder to play the game. So now that my break's over, I'm going to make an effort to make a video for pretty much everything that gets previewed for the upcoming PoE patch, basically. We're going to potentially have daily videos, if that's the cadence of their previews. And I'm going to be back full-time from now on. I don't think I'm going to be doing very much Twitch at all. I think I may just cut streaming out for the time being and focus on my YouTube content. So if you did like this video or you found it useful in any way, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe. I've been on break for about 3 months or so, and so the YouTube algorithm probably hates me and doesn't want to show my videos to a lot of people. So, you know, I really appreciate any interactions you could give me, get me back on the algorithm and all that, and I will make an effort to make sure that content starts coming out regularly. Last patch, a lot of problems, and I think balancing, you know, my job with streaming with YouTube meant that there wasn't a lot of time to make YouTube videos, and I don't like that. I prefer YouTube over streaming, and I think my audience does as well. So I'm going to be focusing more on YouTube content going forward, and maybe in the future, if we can fit streaming back into things, we'll do that. But I haven't been able to strike a balance so far, so I just want to pump out really good YouTube content and forget about streaming for the time being. Anyway, I will see you guys in the next video.